I'm a cognitive scientist, kind of turned computational social scientist, really fundamentally interested in self-governance, in the commons, in community, with a quantitative computational approach. Big kind of things I'm into. There's the commons as a framework for all of humanity's biggest challenges. That's a depleted well. There's the internet as a laboratory for helping us empower, all communities on Earth, for helping us, make communities empowered and create collective value. I have an enduring related side interest in intentional communities for social transformation. That's a diagram from an actual 400-person community in Japan I visited and studied a bit. And then governance across types of conscious experience. If through some fluke we don't have enough questions based on all the different things I'm going to talk about, there's a whole other talk on child self-governance I like to give that I'm not going to give, but I'm going to tease it hard. Yeah. Is it possible to get rid of the Zoom? Oh, right. Yeah, you guys have to see all that, don't you? Yeah, so that's the rationale of my slide design, that I have these kind of buckets I can drop crap in. I'm gonna boop that. I'm gonna boop that. And this, I'm gonna boopify, deboopify, hide, hide, hide floating, hide floaters. Yeah? Oh yeah, for some reason I thought I was the only one seeing it. But here we are. Okay, for work, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go, there's the paradigm and the motivating questions. I'll do one project in like superficial detail, and then I'll flash through a couple like single slide, just like here's some other cool stuff type of thing. So, I'm heavily influenced by a woman named Elinor Ostrom. Elinor Ostrom was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in economics. She did it for, I'm very rote on this. She did it for, her contributions to the study of the commons, particularly her work showing that you don't need the market, you don't need the state, that communities can self-organize robust, sustainable commons management institutions. The theoretical frameworks and research frameworks she developed in the process of proving that to economists who took about 50 years to accept it. That was the process of developing frameworks that are useful for studying self-governance in general. And so I take that and use it for lots of other stuff. And a really important thing about that is her questions aren't about people, they're about communities. Now, when we see like quantitative work, or when we see work on society, when we see work by sociologists, it tends to either be you call it sociology, but you're actually studying lots of people, lots of individuals. Your unit of analysis is one person. I'm going to call that behavioral science. Or you do the work to study a real community, a real group, real organization, a real population, a real country, with or without numbers. We'll call that a case study. And what's actually important is to study a large number of societies, if that's your question, if your question is about community or society. Now, what happens is most quantitative work is either quantitative case study or behavioral science. Very little of it is social scale. If cell biologists study cells and psychologists study lots of individuals, why don't social scientists study lots of societies? So this is all a reason to go online and use the online communities as laboratories for general questions about how we govern ourselves and the governance systems we design. It's hard, but if you go online, there's actually lots of common pool resource management institutions popping up all the time. So this is a time lapse of a Minecraft community. And what you want to see are the trees going down, the buildings going up. So buildings, I mean, they're technically infinite in Minecraft, but controlling for the cost of travel, you can call virtual trees one of many common pool resources that people who come together for personal pleasure, entirely voluntarily, investing lots of time and often money into their online community, these are problems they have to solve. And by understanding how they do that, we can get more general insights of how we should all do that. That's important because The biggest problems facing humanity are legitimately all common pool resource dilemmas. And of course, technological and online problems also have the same issue. Um, for the record, my only AI generated image in the talk is was that one, AI abuses. So here are examples of lots of large populations of social systems. So there's one Wikipedia, but there's 300 Wikipedias. There's 300 language editions, and they all are autonomously governed. I have some work on that. There's Reddit, which is one platform, but about 2 million independent communities run by volunteers, about 100, 200,000 of which have written rules that we can analyze and break down and taxonomize. So there's some work on that in my group. Open source software community is divided into these foundations that provide administrative support to hundreds of open source projects that literally run the internet. And so there's kind of a pressing social need to understand their own sustainability. We can use these lenses to perform large scale comparative work at the social system level. Yeah, so those are examples. There's Minecraft, which sounds like a game, and it's more and more centrally hosted by Microsoft, but actually, especially in its early days, if you logged onto a server, you were logging on to one of maybe 300,000 community run servers, which don't just have to deal with virtual resources, but have to deal with physical resources of CPU, RAM, and bandwidth, which on a shared server are all common pool resources. The exact type of finite resource that's behind, water problems and forest problems and fishing problems. It's the same type of thing, and solutions to it can generalize if you ask the right question. Here's an example of the governance ecosystem that emerged within Minecraft, driven by players. Players invented an entire ecosystem of governance modules that you could pick from an a la carte menu for your own, as a reflection of your own folk theory of collective action. You could install private property rights. By default, there aren't any. You can install monitoring and enforcement. You want peer enforcement or top-down enforcement? You want remediation or prevention of bad behavior? These are all choices that hundreds of thousands of young people made in deciding how to build their village. And by understanding those choices, we can understand what people look for in collective action regimes. World of Warcraft had a bunch of great stuff. More interesting is the pirate World of Warcraft ecosystem that reverse engineered the game, came up with a parallel version of it, of which maybe 100 servers exist around the world, all of which have 20-page policy manuals just to play a game, including appeal processes for bans and moderation. So really complex governance regimes that we can study en masse. Go ahead. Questions are welcome. Actually, yeah, I don't know how to support questions on there, but I'll try to keep it. Oh, my audio. If you guys see hands there, you let me know.
I'll
Anna.
let you know. Yeah. Just before we launch deeper into the method, what are the kinds of questions that you want to answer? Maybe either I missed it or maybe
That's great.
this. Yeah. So what kinds of things can you learn from the governance?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm really interested. So I do have a bigger motivation, which is I care about democracy. And I think it's not, democracy is not just a set of rules. It's a set of rules you write on a group of people who have certain values, internalize certain norms, and develop certain skills. And if you look at, it's very rare that philosophers agree on things. But if you look at the philosophy of democracy, you see this startling consensus that a healthy democracy requires people with daily governance practice, with daily practice in their everyday lives of civic skills. And books like Bowling Alone kind of document the atrophy of those skills in the United States with the emergence of mass communication and television and so on. And so there's this thesis that maybe, if we're lucky, online communities, the fact that anyone can create one, the fact that people get so much of their meaning online, despite it's not being physical, can be the place that people redevelop those skills.
Mhm.
So that's one thesis. One big picture question I'm pursuing is it doing that, and what can we do to make that more successful? 1 out of 20 communities succeed.
Mhm.
So if we can get it to 2 out of 20, then it's twice as effective, you know?
So are you linking the structure of governance systems, the set of rules, the way that they're implemented? Are you linking that, like the properties of that,
That's right.
to outcomes?
So separate from that, there's all these governance design questions. What makes a robust, effective governance system? That's usually posed in terms of structure, because structure is the easy thing to measure. But there's a lot of opportunities with this work, and I really want to share a project that gets into that I'm super proud of, which is uh, how do we measure the kind of cultural complement to that set of rules? Because it's certainly the culture structure fit and the structure rule match that's going to determine successful outcomes. So how do we make culture as unmysterious as structure for people who want to start something from scratch? That's a design question. What are the general proper, because like when I look at 20 communities, when I've lived in 15 co-ops, and they all keep the kitchen sink clean in different ways. This community does it among other ways with like internalized norms.
To use the internet, you have to.
Right. And so, okay, they all work, they all do it differently. What's like, is there room for science? Because clearly not everything goes. There's lots of ways to do it completely differently than everyone else that are wrong.
Right, and that's also my question, like as a psychologist, right?
Yeah.
What's our favorite dependent measure? So do you measure people's satisfaction with their communities? Do you measure rule following and adherence?
I have the luxury of taking a kind of context dependent approach that makes it so like it depends on the community what success looks like. It would be a lie to say that's entirely like based on domain knowledge. Sometimes it's based on what numbers I can get. But here's an example. The number of people who came back at least once a week for a month. The H index for our academic papers, and the H index of posts on a subreddit. The maximum number of people, the maximum H, such that that number of people made that many posts in a month, is some like deeper engagement. You can give me better numbers, I'll give you a better like quantification. We kind of do what we can. It depends on the project. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. All right, good. More? Okay, great. Actually, yeah, thanks for encouraging that. I'll skip that. Here's some examples of, these are actually, I could have just moved to the next slide. Here's a bunch of questions I asked. What predicts the accretion of governance structure? So when governance systems change, it's not always to get better. There's often political processes that happen in governance systems, and those can cause governance to grow independent of like some functional end. What governance systems do communities design for themselves and what works? Is governance change due to selection or drift? When a governance system changes, how often is that because there's a lot of communities and the successful ones are disseminating their knowledge and reproducing in the evolutionary process? And how much is just kind of new trends? Oh, sociocracy just went open source, has open source documentation. Let's adopt, So we actually managed to quantify that in Minecraft. Do we run how we say we run? What's the actual difference between what our rules say and what we do, and how important is it for those to look like each other? And do I have any control over how we say we run? And how we run via how we say we run, via formal rule changes. What are the social psychological correlates of community leaders? This gets into that. Can online communities provide the skills? What drives policy development trajectories? This is like a diversity question that was really fun to answer. And what are the variety, when you develop a multi-level governance system, is that one thing? It turns out it's at least dozens, because we looked at 12 platforms and they all do it differently. And so that's a design question. And so, yeah, I try to look at design questions. I try to look at scientific questions. Often the data set picks what questions you can ask, and often there's enough platforms out there. You can go question first and find the platform to help you answer it. I'm not going to get into Do We Run How We Say We Run, though I'm really thrilled about it. That just got accepted into ACM Chi, if you know it. We're really proud of that project. I'm going to get into do governance system, what systems do people design in Minecraft? I do want to make a pitch for MetaGov is a community I'm active in. A lot of my output has been through MetaGov collaborations. These are people interested in the internet as a lab for online governance design. And a new book out by my friend and colleague at MetaGov, Governable Spaces, which captures a lot of my values and way of thinking. And it just came out, so I want to pitch it. And it's free online. So this was a Minecraft project. So Minecraft is an infinite world. Anyone can create their own instantiation of it. And in this world that goes on in every direction, there are resources. There's one person in charge and there's a lot of users. That person, together, they do really impressive things, like manually building a one-to-one replica of the Starship Enterprise. So impressive, and that takes coordination, cooperation, work, governance. And they have a big vocabulary of rules they can draw from. I showed you that slide earlier. So I had a little bot that ran for 2 years, asking 300,000 servers every hour what they're up to. And from that, I observed 550 million visits by 10 million players and extracted the governance design of a subset of those communities. Not everyone publishes it. So what do we find? This is how I can tell you that most communities fail. What I want you to do is kind of squint at the gray, and the darker gray is more failure, and the lighter gray is less failure. Sorry. Yeah. The darker gray is more communities. The lighter gray is less communities. The x-axis is communities that intend to be small. Versus increasing to communities that intend to be large. And you can see that gray column is telling you that most communities want to be from 4 to 16 people. The y-axis is my measure of community. This is number of people who came back at least once a week for a month. So there's that white part up in the upper left. That's because if your intended size is 4, it never happens that you got 64 people to come at least once a week per month. And notice that the value of core group can be 0 or 1 or higher. We're going to say if it's 0, you're a total failure. If it's 1, only you showed up at least once a week per month, the person running it, the admin. So we'll call those failures, and we'll call anything above in that other, those 2 bottom rows are failures. Everything above that is success. And you can see that failure is twice as likely as success by this definition. Now, we can design, so we can look at the modules, the governance modules they install. I can taxonomize them by what problem they solve and by how they solve it. So what problem they solve, you can solve bad behavior. You can solve physical resources, and you can solve virtual resource problems. You can do it by improving communication, improving information dissemination, providing for exchange structures like installing markets, and by empowering the administrator. If you see any black arrows, those are significant effects. Those are significant findings. And so the significant findings are that the efforts to solve behavior problems increase as servers get larger. Efforts to solve physical resource problems get bigger as communities get larger. Doing it by further empowering your administrator increases the bigger you are. And only one of these things is correlated with success. More physical resource management, CPU, RAM, and bandwidth. Basically, if one player sets too many fires or grows too many sheep, it'll slow down the computer for everyone else who wants to play the game, and they'll all leave. And you can install plugins that solve that particular common pool resource dilemma, and solving that particular one is more correlated with success than anything else. And just overall, the more rules you have, the more successful you seem to be. Also, a more subtle, nuanced finding is that the greater the variety of problems you are solving, and the greater the variety of ways you're trying to solve those problems is correlated with success. So this is an institutional diversity finding that you shouldn't have one hammer, that you should have lots of hammers to hit lots of nails with, and you'll be more likely to succeed than if you just rely on markets, just rely on a strong administrator, and so on. Yes.
So you did set up another aspect of success earlier in the intro where you talked about building this complex starship. So I get it that maybe returning players is like a way to get there, but have you also separately measured whether they achieve their
I got for 50 servers. We got fine-grained in-server data. Everything else, this whole study is based on outside data. Just looking as an outsider, not seeing action on the server. I would love to get that, don't get me wrong. And that's a great measure. Assuming you know the goal of that server is to build megastructures. But that's only a goal of a small...
I mean, as a psychologist, I would ask people who are like, did you succeed on the goal that your team had?
Right.
Because it would be hard to measure how well did they build it, objective, whatever. But
right. Yeah. And so that gets in the survey, and I have some survey stuff. It's not my main method. I'm lazy, and it's easier to scrape. But yeah, that's it's a great compliment, and that would be a way to get at it. I hear you. Oh, there was a hand.
Another,
yeah.
I am curious, you said rely on markets. So a lot of early AOI, other folks on the call will know this, was very interested in ways in which AI and optimizer systems will change how market incentives take place. I don't understand how the idea of a market maps to communities like Minecraft or Wikipedia, where inherently there's a non-financial transaction aspect to it. So I just wanted to get I have ideas on what it might be, but I'm curious to hear your definition of market.
I'm defining it by the self-classification of plugins that implement shops in the game. I would go ahead and say that markets, they're not really instrumented to solve cone pool resource dilemmas. That's sort of like one of the fundamental critiques of markets is they handle externalities poorly, is what you would say in jargon. But they certainly handle distribution problems super effectively, and we empirically see, I'm not making any claims about what should or shouldn't work. I empirically see it's a major kind of thing that gets installed. Yeah, so I don't know, maybe I avoided your question. You want to ask it again?
I think it added a little color to my question, so that is good. I'm curious about like the role the market plays in this case for whether like your definition of success. Like, are you linking it like it is likelier to be more successful given the presence of a market, or are there specific dynamics within the market that are responsible?
We don't, I don't see any correlation of more market-based plugins to community success, either in general or with respect to any specific problem. Now, that might sound disappointing, but honestly, nothing came out significant except further empowering the administrator. If you want, you can make the meta argument. Remember the context of Minecraft. It's hard to leave a country and join a new country. Decades. It's easy to leave a Minecraft server and join another. So Minecraft is an implementation of Nozick's kind of capitalist utopia, which is a market for tyrants. And so every administrator has market in the Minecraft ecosystem, you could argue, has a market incentive to act as if they're benevolent. So if you want to, and a lot of what gets me out of bed in the morning is hate reading libertarian theory. But I have Are you okay?
This is
But it's been hard to deny that that's a really likely mechanism for Minecraft success, is the way it's offering this. Now, we have an implicit feudalism critique at MetaGov that Minecraft didn't provide an alternative. Democracy is not the default, centralization is the default. So nothing is going to solve tyranny but market pressures. And if we provide better tools for collective governance by default, then perhaps we don't have to rely on market mechanisms. My ideology is bleeding through a little bit. I would say that people who start off with market solutions, the AI problems or other types of problems, and then sort of on the light get disappointed and see the light and start getting into culture, value, and norms. Those apostates, they tend to come to me. They often end up at MetaGov, for example. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for your answer.
Yes, of course. How are we doing on time?
It's 10:30.
It's halfway, and I want to leave time for questions. So I'm gonna. We have other. We have like all those choices. Are they made because are they actively selected for? Do communities that select them become more likely to succeed, or is it more like diffusion of trends? We're able to answer this and to show that the focus on empowering the administrator is adaptive, and other changes tend to be trends. We have a really, really cool paper I'm very proud of. There's a link in the corner if you're recording that you can see how we quantify how a community runs and how a community says it runs. And we're able to show that the more rules you have is uncorrelated. So there's 40 topics. Some have lots of rules, some have fewer rules. That's uncorrelated with how much people talk about each topic. And it's uncorrelated kind of with the success of a project's likelihood. In this case, there's an objective measure of success for this population. But one thing that is correlated with more rules is how much people internalize those rules, how much the words they use when they're talking about it matches the words used in the policy. Causation could go either way, but it's still a nice finding, a nice link between how we run and how we say we run. I have a little taxonomy of multi-level governance systems out. I can update that link. We have some CAD for governance tools. This is a generalization of game theory in the mathematics of software engineering that makes economic games composable. So we can use them as descriptions of complex social systems rather than as toy models of specific tensions within social systems. And that's a bunch of work. That's a rat-a-tat. It's intended to leave y'all wanting more, I would say. On the subject, now I have a thing I'm up to right now. I'm just going to ask you all some question, which is this. Boop, boop, boop. Bigger. Okay.
There's a little dialogue window if you could.
Oh, yeah. Allow accessory. No, I don't know you. Okay, immigration is a policy area where people often debate which types of errors are acceptable. So what's more acceptable to you? A person who, in your opinion, is qualified to immigrate is wrongfully expelled, or a person unqualified to immigrate wrongfully in your opinion, wrongfully remains in the U.S. Which is more acceptable? More acceptable.
Acceptable. Wait.
Which is good?
Yes.
Gooder.
The second one.
The second one is gooder. Okay. You'd rather that. All right. Okay. People are choosing the second one. So we'll get a little more specific. Give me a number. How many people that you think are unqualified will you tolerate to prevent one person who you think is qualified from being kicked out? It's complicated. We have comprehension checks. This is a final survey that's ready to deploy.
Yeah, I'm going to say 10 just because my unqualified kind of means things like they are perhaps likely to commit major crimes or something like that,
Okay.
maybe, or something that is harmful to others. But it depends on what I included qualified.
Yeah, you'll notice the survey doesn't ask for justification.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's hard, right? It's a little hard. To put it coarsely, how many what we'll call illegal immigrants would you let remain in the country to prevent one dreamer from being kicked out? To put it like in more cultural terms. Does anyone want to give a different number, or what do you got?
I interpreted qualified as, or unqualified rather, more as like they might be a mild rating on the system, like maybe they end up on food stamps but commit 0 crimes.
So because Seth gave us our own definition
Yeah,
of
yeah.
qualified, and I'm like, well, like what do I think is important for qualification? Right. And I think it's like we're respecting the rules of the country to some extent. Even then, I'm like, I'm a big
Sure.
softie.
No, that's great. That's great. That's just fine. I don't mind using our own definitions. I could go either way, but that's why I'm going. So what's your number?
Oscillating between 100 and 1,000.
Okay. 10,000. Wow.
I'd probably go for
100. Wow. So yeah. So I like this because I think of myself as pretty liberal, but out of 10, you know. And this makes us specific. It doesn't just make us specific, but it changes immigration discussions because it's not like are you for or against. I have a theory that people who say they're against, people who say they're for, if you ask them what number, you'll get more or less the same number. So this is possibly, you know, I'm a dreamer in a different sense, which is that I think that a lot of our divisions are all just one big misunderstanding. I appreciate that it's really naive. This is a way to get at that, right? That if we just pin people down on remembering that there will always be two types of error, then it's possible we don't disagree as much as we say. What's nice about this is there's partisan differences. That's a hypothesis. So there's partisan differences in error tolerance. In our dialogue, but if you actually measure it, possibly there's not. I can relate all of this to another thing, which is here on the bottom we have here's an empirical ROC curve. This is a thing you get out of a classifier when you train a logistic regression, which is just one of many types of classifiers. And the simplest thing that people are willing to call AI. You actually don't get one classifier. You get a family of classifiers along this black line curve. And along this black line curve, what we have are all the classifiers willing to make all the possible trade-offs between dreamers and illegals. We have a problem if we're going to be integrating AI into policy of what's a good interface for connecting the will of the people to what a classifier does. This method, particularly if it reduces partisan divides, is equivalent to giving you a position on the ROC curve and telling you which specific classifier out of your family of classifiers that you just trained should be used to implement policy. And so surveys written, the IRB was written and went out. My original co-author dropped out of science. So I've just been sitting on this for years, and I think it's a cool thing. I want to see what'll happen. So if someone wants to, you know, participate in this with me, I think that would be really fun. It was actually this discussion about this project that got me my invitation to be the inaugural speaker. Thank you, Anna. So that's kind of why I shared this. But because I've got you all, I'm going to ask a couple questions. So
there's a question.
Oh, goody. Yes.
We can pick this up later. There was a project called Open Questions, and I think it is this with also an aspect of being able to go into qualitative judgments in parallel. I think there is immense synergy with, so I'd love to discuss that further, especially if this seems like it's in a stale moment. I think there might be something there.
Great.
But yeah, very, very cool.
My name is my email, or shoot me one, or put your contact in the chat, or I'll probably dawdle after this all.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna invite you to lunch.
Great. Okay, yeah. So there's a roundness.
Right.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to hear that. Okay, I'm not an AI person. I have lots of questions, and my study sense goes off in a lot of AI alignment discussions because key terms like existential risk, AI alignment, they've been introduced by people sort of on one side of the discussion. And whenever I'm in a conversation where all the vocab has been only produced by people who agree, I start to feel nervous. And I start to wonder if the questions they're asking me, the questions they're giving me to answer are not the right questions. Now, I developed this spidey sense through failing lots of times, through asking questions of social systems and getting lots of null results and learning the difference between the right question and the wrong question in feeling. So here's some questions. In this community, as I understand it, you have the idea of effective altruism, which leads to the idea of existential risk, which leads to the idea of infinite positive or negative utility, which leads to a conclusion that serious attention is merited. on AI and asteroids and so on. Okay, great. Good. Is that fair? Is that a characterization that's acceptable?
Definitely a characterization of a perspective.
Of a perspective. Okay. Yeah, and I know I'm not. Yeah, I don't. Yeah. Well, I think we've got all kinds of views. Here's another thing I see. In logic, utilitarianism leads to the argument of the utility monster, which produces infinite positive negative utility, which was introduced to invalidate utilitarianism. We introduced the utility monster to say, as a critique of that philosophy, as a critique of that solution, to say that it's not the right way of thinking about certain types of questions. So what's going on? Like, I'm going nuts here. Has the whole world gone crazy? Is what I think. I don't know. Like, help me out here. The utility monster is not an argument that we should invest all social resources into the most extravagant hedonists. Like, it doesn't. That's not what you get from that. It's an argument that we shouldn't use utilitarianism to evaluate certain decisions. And the idea of infinite utility is a singularity, and a singularity is not a focal point for discussion. It's literally an undefined point in a model, and it means the model is invalid if you're using it to discuss invalid points. Well, this is a question that we can discuss over lunch. That's one of my questions. Here's my other question. So basically, if EA comes from utils, if XRisk comes from EA, if alignment is about XRisk, then is AI alignment the right framework for discussing I'm not saying there's no threats of AI.
I would disagree with this. From alignment is not about X risk. In fact, I think alignment becomes much more interesting in questions that are not about existential risk.
Okay, that's nice, and I'm eager to discuss that. I'm going to keep moving. I'm glad that you're questioning my assumptions.
Right.
It does. Can I say it comes from XRisk?
I would not. I mean, alignment actually is much before X risk or AI being a question. Like, alignment is around, is an institution serving its constituents, is one way to think about it, for example.
To say that I'm being unfair is a super valid answer, and I'd just like to have it explained to me. If this comes off as a critique, it's because I'm stuck, and you can help me. Here's another thing. I collected a bunch of quotes. I want to show you. Here's my other question. Okay, so here's some quotes. The main danger from advanced artificial intelligence comes from not knowing how to control powerful AI systems, not from any specific use case. AI can and will serve us, but there are uses and there are outcomes we cannot agree to, and there have to be serious consequences if the lines cross, and so on. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I was reading some recently, and I was feeling uncomfortable. I was feeling like the wrong question is being asked. I felt like I was in a fun house and people were telling me the walls are straight. So I did a little game. I replaced every instance of AI with poor people. The main danger from poor people comes from not knowing how to control them. Poor people can and will serve us, but there are uses and there are outcomes we cannot agree to, and there have to be serious consequences if that line is crossed. The poor people do not love you, nor do they hate you, and you're made of atoms you are made for atoms they can use. The deep issue with poor people is not that they're evil or have a specifically dangerous aspect that you need to take out. It's the fact that they're competent. If you cannot control a competent poor person, it is by definition dangerous. All right, now, I'm calling this the poor people test. Is it unfair? As a rhetorical measure, it's obviously unfair because there's also the marshmallow test, there are deep issues with marshmallows. Is not that they're evil. If you can't control competent marshmallow. So you could play this game in stupid ways. And if I want to use that argument to say that specifically someone's being alarmist, that's an invalid use of the poor people test. But here's a valid use of the poor people test. It's valuable for evaluating if AI alignment gives us good questions. Because what shows up, at least for me, when I read those questions in the context of poor people, I see really just overgeneral treatment of complex issues. I see that it's treating poor people or AI as a monolith in a non-constructive way. I see it's treating us, we humanity, in a monolithic way. And overall, the feeling I get is that when I hear an answer in that framing, I just learned more about the person giving me the answer than I did about the issue. And so just as a heuristic, here's what the poor people test is useful for in a pinch. If you can read a whole essay and it still makes sense with poor people replaced, then it wasn't a substantive essay. And I don't know who's friends with who here, but the Connor Leahy stuff, you can just switch out everything with poor people, and it just reads hilariously. Whereas with Yudkowsky, I had to dig a little bit to find sentences that worked, because he's speaking, it seems a little more precisely about AI, you know, and so it just doesn't the poor people test doesn't work on his stuff. And so, so this a big I might be abusing my platform, but these are like things that have been bugging me, and y'all seem like answer for starting a discussion over lunch. And with that, thanks so much.